The Grand Canyon keeps a kind of silence that feels engineered. Not the lazy hush of wind between cliffs, but a sealed quiet that seems to protect something deeper. Beneath the layered stone and the persistent roar of the Colorado, there are places maps refuse to name, chambers shuttered behind concrete, coordinates that vanish from official charts. For generations, rumors have threaded through ranger houses and diner booths, tunnels, a heartbeat under the rock, images that disappear from archives as if the canyon itself edits the record. Listen closely. This is a journey into 6 of the canyon's most unsettling mysteries, reordered, retold, and held together by one question. What does the earth hide when no one is watching? First mystery, Section 7G and the concrete seal. At one overlook, the wall seems like a modern scar, a vertical facade of poured concrete set flush into red rock. Locals call it Section 7G. Official files call it simply a stabilization project. Those who have stood feet from that wall tell another story. Trucks arrived in the dark. Men worked like a unit, not like park contractors. The paperwork that should explain the operation exists only as a stamped line reading containment and stabilization, with the contractor blacked out in bureaucratic ink. People who pressed a palm to the wall described a faint vibration, not wind, not machinery, but a slow throb that crawled under gloves and into bone. Once, after a heavy storm, rebar showed at an exposed edge. The metal was darker than modern steel, older in tone, as if forged from something other than current processes. Satellite images taken the next week were altered. The exposure was smoothed out, the access road rerouted, and the memory of the incident collapsed into silence. Was the wall poured to hold back a sinkhole or to lid an entrance? Former workers whisper that Section 7G covers a cavity large enough to drive a train into, and that instruments read densities inconsistent with natural stone. The official record offers a clinical explanation. The eyewitnesses offer a different tone, a place that breathes slow and deep and prefers its secrets fenced. Second mystery, the blank squares on maps. Maps tell stories we agree to believe, but in certain early field sheets, whole blocks of topography appear intentionally omitted, rectangular voids marked as if someone excised the paper. Surveyors in the early 1900s annotated structural voids near Marble Canyon. Later reproductions simply show unbroken stone. When a satellite analyst compiled LiDAR layers in 2011, she found identical surgical blanks sliced from the data, rectangular zones where elevation returns were absent with unnatural precision. Those blank spaces line up in a corridor along the north rim. Cameras and drones behave oddly above them. Signals drop, compasses spin, footage corrupts. Pilots who reported instrument interference were told to chalk it up to error. Yet the same pattern recurs across a century of observations. The simplest explanation, technical fault or human neglect, strains when the same missing tiles recur at the same coordinates, decade after decade. It looks less like mistake and more like erasure. Third mystery, the trail that opens only when the light is right. There exists a faint route remembered by long-haul rangers and folklore seekers, a narrow path that only shows itself at certain angles of daylight, a vein in the rock that appears and disappears like a secret breath. Some call it Kincaid's Trail, a name borrowed from an early account of a man who claimed an entrance high above the river. Experienced hikers have followed that path and never returned. Their GPS units failed in the final hours. Search teams found packs laid beside intact tent stakes. A single boot, a trail of prints leading toward a sheer face, and then nothing. In multiple cases, the last device pings a line in a semicircle around a restricted research corridor. Witnesses who pressed toward the cliff described square recesses high in the wall, door-sized hollows lit as if from within, then gone. At dawn, the openings had vanished, leaving only clean stone and the sense of being watched. Fourth mystery, the canyon's pulse. Harmonic tones under Marble Canyon. Once, scientists lowered seismic sensors expecting the familiar hum of groundwater. Instead, the instruments registered rhythmic tones, geometric three-note chords repeating at regular intervals. In 1996, Arrays detected a pulse emerging from nearly 3 kilometers beneath the surface. Not random tectonics, but harmonic oscillations. The pattern persisted for 72 hours before abruptly stopping. Internal memos later described oscillation inconsistent with geological activity. Locals who had felt the vibration long before instruments confirmed anything call it the canyon's heartbeat. Hikers camping along the rim reported waking to a pressure underfoot that moved through the chest like low thunder. Journalists who tried to record the sound captured only static and once, 2 sharp knocks as if something on the other side of the recorder tapped back. Private researchers confirmed the pulses in subsequent years, but their findings were classified or quietly marginalized. The heavier the probe, the louder the response, as if the canyon resented being listened to. Fifth mystery: photographs that vanish and footage corrupted. Photographs are the modern proof, yet here proof often dissolves. A river guide posted a photo of a square opening high in a cliff face, only to later find the image erased and his account deleted. A drone sent to map a forbidden coordinate lost signal within seconds. The recovered footage contained a single intact frame of a dark hollow glowing faintly, the rest corrupted. Attempts to reproduce archival plates from early newspapers have hit the same wall. Reels missing, microfilm cut, scans that carry blank spaces where headlines should be. Ordinary evidence fracturing into absence builds its own kind of credibility. When multiple independent images, recordings, and plates fail in the same corridor, it becomes harder to claim coincidence. The canyon is not merely silent, it edits its record. Interlude: the canyon's oral memory. Long before modern maps, elders of local tribes spoke of passages and emergence points. Oral traditions name the canyon as a site of origin and return, a place where the world breathes. Petroglyph spirals and ancient markers align with restricted coordinates on modern maps and overlay where myth and anomaly meet. Scientists map voids and call them cast beds. Elders call them chambers of waiting. Different languages, similar observations. The canyon keeps cavities beneath its skin, places where human memory and geology overlap. Seventh thread: instruments that fail along the same line. From private pilots who reported compasses spinning to surveyors whose altimeters froze, the instrument failures trace a consistent corridor. Where maps once labeled forbidden places, modern avionics and cameras sometimes refuse to read the land. Engineers call it interference. Skeptics call it artifact. But when independent teams fly the same line and the same systems falter, patterns harden into something more than technical quirk. Eighth thread: restricted tests and papers that vanish. Occasionally, a group publishes a technical bulletin about an anomaly, and then the bulletin disappears. Reports on ground-penetrating radar with anomalous returns get sealed under environmental safety or cultural sensitivity. Researchers resign after redaction. Freedom of information requests produce heavily black documents. When science encounters data that invasive curiosity insists on naming, administrative channels often find a reason to bury the paper. The canyon's mysteries, it seems, are not only geological, but bureaucratic. Ninth thread: small clues that point to a larger pattern. A boot found 50 feet from an unbroken edge. A camera left rolling that ends with static and then a low 3-note sequence. Drone frames showing door-like rectangles in a cliff that vanish from online archives. These fragments don't prove everything, but they nudge the sequence into shape. Repeated instrument failure, corrupted imagery, and fenced-off land form a pattern. A corridor that answers probes, a patchwork of absence across decades. 10th thread: the people who pushed and then slipped from record. Those who pressed the hardest. The independent investigators, the whistleblowers, the lead authors of withdrawn papers, often found their traces thinned. Articles that once existed were missing from microfilm. Project leads resigned and moved away. Digital repositories returned blank tiles. The act of looking ultimately seemed to invite the record to recede. That cultural erasure becomes part of the phenomenon. Removal itself is evidence. 11th thread: the canyon as an editorial archive. The Grand Canyon contains nearly 2 billion years of sedimentary memory. To cut into its layers is not just to unearth objects, but to edit context. If a structure were carved into that record, Removing it would extract not only artifacts but the time frame that explains them. That is why some scholars argue that we are not only missing objects, we may be missing the lines that make the objects meaningful. The canyon AS blanks might be an editorial hand smoothing away inconvenient chapters of Earth's story. 12th thread, resonance and response. When instruments were lowered, some teams noted the pulses changed. Signals increased, shifted, or fell into harmonic regularities that suggested reaction rather than chance. It is one thing to measure a strange reading. It is another to see that reading alter when you intrude. The canyon in those moments behaves less like inert stone and more like an organism that registers attention. 13th thread, the academic who walked away. An author of a preliminary study on anomalous magnetic signatures watched his paper taken offline. The lead author resigned quietly, telling a colleague simply that some knowledge is not yet ours to hold. The removal of an academic footprint is not proof of a conspiracy, but it is consistent with a pattern. The more the data suggests something outside the usual models, the more institutional hands close ranks. 14th thread, local sensations, smell, condensation, and breath. Rangers have recorded smelling dampness along sealed fences where weather patterns don't predict moisture. Condensation appears on concrete faces at night, as if the rock exhales. Those small sensory quirks, a breath of warmth, a wetness on the stone, do not enter formal geologic reports, yet they persist in oral testimony. When the official narrative edits away coordinates, local memory keeps a counter-account. 15th thread, the footprints that keep appearing. Despite fences and warnings, fresh prints appear near restricted boundaries. Myth chasers, researchers, and the curious keep coming. The canyon seems to accept offerings of curiosity. Footprints that fade, packs left behind, devices that die. Some locals say the canyon does not take. It trades. Those who vanish are sometimes thought to become part of an underground ledger, a different kind of record kept where the maps are empty. The sixth and closing mystery, the lost expedition, and the caves that anchor all the rest. In the spring of 1909, an article ran in a regional newspaper describing an entrance high above the Colorado and chambers filled with artifacts, copper tools, carved iconography, mummified remains laid as if in ceremony. The article named an expedition and an associated foundation. Weeks later, the issue could not be located in physical archives. Names dropped from official files. Scholars found gaps where microfilm reels should have been. Over the following century, hikers would claim square openings high in walls. Photographers would find frames that later corrupt, and drones would die at precise coordinates. Ground-penetrating surveys since then have suggested caverns, voids large enough to house cathedrals, cut into the plateau. Where scientists published cautious reports, pages were redacted. Where elders told origin stories, the corridors aligned. The tribal traditions describe emergence points and chambers of waiting. The instruments describe voids and anomalies. Both point to the same chest beneath the plateau, a hollowed architecture beneath layers of sediment. Those who listened recorded a heartbeat. Those who tried to photograph a doorway found their files eaten by static. Those who pursued the trail sometimes returned altered, sometimes not at all. And where the canyon's record grows thin, human tales thicken into myth. Conclusion: the canyon that edits history. The Grand Canyon reads like a book with missing pages. Names vanish, maps white out, images corrupt. Sometimes silence is a kind of containment, and sometimes containment is an argument with history. If a place can be edited, its people can be erased in a page turn. But concrete corrodes, satellites update, and silence fractures. When the canyon speaks again, it will not be gentle. The questions remain. What is being hidden, and why would a monument be built to disguise a discovery? Thank you for listening. If one of these stories kept your attention, leave a like and tell us below what you think should stay buried and what should be unearthed. Like this video and subscribe to this channel, Curio Ray, for more unbelievable stories every day.